how much does a divorce typically cost?
Yes, the number one most asked question.
We've got fixed fee and then we have billable time. What are the differences between those two?
Yeah, so most common is going to be.
Hi, everyone. This is the podcast Illinois Family Law Insider, and I am Katie VanDeusen, the managing partner of Sterling. And I am here today joined by Senior Associate Jacqueline McClellan. Thanks for joining us today, Jacqueline.
Thanks, Katie. I'm excited to get talking today.
Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about what does a divorce really cost and some of the key differences between fixed fee and billable or hourly time. I know this is a really, I think, hot topic and is something that we're really looking forward to delving into with you today. So one of the first questions that I have that everyone kind of wants to ask but typically doesn't is how much does a divorce typically cost?
Yes, the number one most asked question. But the answer, it really depends. It depends on the facts and circumstances of that case. It could range between a couple of $1,000s to hundreds of thousands of dollars. It just depends.
Yep. I feel like that's one of the most typical attorney responses.
Yep.
Very true. It's really hard.
Yeah.
Why don't you explain for some people, what impacts that? Let's say the top contributing factors as to whether a divorce costs a couple $1,000s versus hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah. Are there kids involved? Are the child-related issues going to be contested because that's going to be an extra cost? Are there complex assets like a business or several, investment accounts, retirement accounts that are, both marital and non-marital? So those are kind of the main topics that come to mind that could potentially increase the cost.
And then how likely is personalities or whether something is going to be, amicable or uncontested versus highly litigious? How does that affect things?
Yeah, so that could also affect things. If your spouse is highly litigious or won't agree to anything, that will extend the timeline of the case, which ultimately extends the cost as well.
Definitely. And one other thing, Jacqueline, can you help explain for those that are listening or watching, what are the main billing models most family law firms use? We've got fixed fee and then we have billable time. What are the differences between those two?
Yeah, so most common is going to be billable time. Billable time means they're billing you for literally everything that they do on your case. Anytime they're in court, maybe they're just sitting and waiting for court to start. They're billing you for that. They're even potentially billing you for travel time. They're basically billing you anytime that they work or think about your case. You'll see that on your bill when you eventually get it. Whereas fixed fee, it's typically time-based. You aren't charged extra for wait time. You're not charged extra for phone calls, emails, that kind of thing. And like I said, it's time-based. So if you get your case done within a certain period of time, then you're only paying that quoted fee for that period of time.
Okay. And I heard you say, communication is included. Is that all communication? So the client doesn't have to worry about every phone call, every email, every piece of paper. They're having to be charged for that separately. That's all included in a fixed fee versus that billable model.
Yeah, which is just a really great added benefit. I've noticed because I also worked previously with billable time, clients wouldn't call you until, they absolutely had to. And then you're doing damage control because they didn't want to get charged for that time. So it's really nice on fixed fee because, if you need a call, you email me, we set up a call and you don't have to worry about getting a bill for that.
Absolutely. It's that peace of mind for them, for sure. And then what exactly is a fixed fee divorce and when does it typically apply?
Yeah. So, fixed fee can always apply. I think we've kind of really gone into fixed fee already, but like I said, it's just time-based. It's based on the case and the circumstances. And then for that specific period of time, the cost, though, it's going to completely depend on the legal issues. Like I said, if there's highly contested child-related issues, it's probably going to be more expensive. But if you come to me and you have basically a full agreement and it's mostly uncontested, the cost is likely going to be less.
Yeah, definitely. And what kinds of cases are maybe a better fit for fixed fee? Does it have to be uncontested? Do they not have to have kids? What affects that or what impacts that?
Yeah, no, I mean, it could literally be any type of case. We have options for everyone and every price point.
Definitely. And what are some pros for fixed fee and what a client should think about or consider when kind of comparing these two models of billing that exist at family law firms?
First and foremost, it's going to be that fee certainty, knowing what you're going to pay depending on when the case is resolved. We have the same alignment, right? I want to resolve the case in the shortest period of time that we possibly can because of this fixed fee model. It gives incentives to clients to also try to resolve the issues, either maybe with their spouse or just maybe be more agreeable to reach a settlement. And then the thing we've already kind of honed in on is, the communication. Like, you're not billed extra for it. So it's just really nice for clients. We have more communication than, say, a billable attorney, most likely, because you have that option to reach out, to set up calls, to go over all the issues, that kind of thing.
Definitely. And have you ever in your practice experienced or seen a client who wanted that predictability and chose a fixed fee model? And did it work well, or did it have any type of negative impact on them at all?
Most times, if clients and the other side are somewhat agreeable, fixed fee is going to be a fantastic option because we are going to, try to get everything drafted and prepared and try to finalize it as quickly as possible.
Definitely. That efficiency piece, I think, is something that is really missing from that hourly or billable time model. That I think fixed fee really gets that alignment and creates that between the attorney and the client.
Absolutely, because, billable attorneys have an incentive to drag it on as long as they want to. So we don't have that incentive.
Correct. It's like at the end of the day, the more they bill, the more money they're making.
Right.
And I think that there is a disconnect with handling things efficiently and effectively when you're financially incentivized, maybe to do the opposite, right? And that creates a tension or almost like I think that there is a misalignment there that I don't think can be fixed with the way that that model operates. So,
Right.
and then shifting a little bit. So, how does the billable model work? How does billing by the hour work and what's included in that time, or how does that work?
Yeah, so typically they bill in like 6-minute increments. So maybe they sent an email and it took them 2 minutes, but they're billing for the whole 6 minutes. So it can really add up over time. However many emails you send that require a response, they're going to be billing you for it.
And then what's a typical hourly range based on your experience or what you've seen in Illinois? And how does that maybe go up or down depending on different factors?
Yeah, so I've seen a range between like 350 an hour to maybe even 550 an hour. Completely depends on the attorney's experience, but it also depends on the county where the divorce is filed.
Wow. And have you found maybe like rural counties versus maybe more metropolitan counties? Like, is there an impact on that as well?
Yeah, typically like counties like maybe Lake, McHenry, Will County, maybe the attorneys bill a little bit less. It just completely depends. But Cook County, I've noticed they have the higher rates.
Yep, definitely. And then can clients, do clients keep track of how their time is being used, or do they end up just getting a bill and hope for the best? How does that kind of work based on your experience with billable time?
Yeah. So with billable attorneys, you should, that's the key word, should get a monthly bill with knowing what you have to pay, but you really have no control over that. You're being billed after the fact. Yeah, you're maybe sending the emails or instructing them to speak with the other attorney, but you have no control over how long that actually takes. And then you're just expected to pay at the end of the month.
And what a good, I think you just identified or hit it right on the head. You're being billed after the fact, right? Like you are not being presented with that information proactively or on the front end. And I think that's also a real disconnect between the client and the attorney because again, it's after the fact, right? And then you're having to deal with, oh my God, I just got a bill for $1,200 worth of legal work for this month. And I was maybe anticipating, $500. And there's just that almost like reactive or like retroactive issue that is really kind of affecting you financially that you don't have any control over. And then have you ever worked on a case that maybe started simple or, hey, everything's agreed upon, this should be amicable and uncontested, but then it took a turn and shifted into something that was highly litigious? And how did that affect the fixed fees, and how did that impact the client, and how did you handle that?
Yeah, so I've certainly had cases that came to me uncontested. They have agreement on maybe all issues. So I quoted them for an uncontested divorce. As soon as we learn, like, yeah, there's no longer an agreement, then we just transition them to what we call a full representation agreement. So that will implement, all of the litigation that is going to occur.
And that's a really good point too to make, where we don't treat every single case like a litigious, difficult divorce. We really do try to find the option that best fits the client. And then we can always make adjustments as time goes on or as issues arise, where we determine, okay, this is really not going to be amicable, or this is not going to be uncontested. And now we do need this other option. That way people aren't overpaying either. I think that might be a concern. Hey, with fixed fee, am I really overpaying? And the reality is no, as long as the firm has different options and price points based on what you anticipate the case will entail, right? And I think that's something that is really worth noting. And then in terms of cost drivers, I know you've already alluded to this earlier on in the podcast, but what causes a case to become more expensive? Like specifically, even if it looks straightforward, what would be the things that you raised earlier that would increase the cost?
Yeah, so if the child related issues are contested, you guys can't reach an agreement in mediation, and then we have to get a guardian ad litem appointed, that's a different attorney that comes in. So that's going to increase the cost, and it's a cost that we're not going to be able to, give you a quote for because it's a different attorney. So they're going to bill however they bill. And then I would also say, if you need a business valuation, it's going to extend the time. If we decide we're going to go through financial mediation, for example, that could extend the time as well and could increase the cost because, again, we're getting a third party involved in the case that, we couldn't necessarily account for or quote for beforehand.
Right. And then one thing I think clients would really want to know is, how can they help manage cost? What can they do to avoid making things worse? Is there anything that you've seen in your practice as almost like key takeaways for a client?
Yeah, if a client's super organized, they have all their documents. If we do have to respond to discovery, they get those to us relatively quickly, ask those questions up front about, what is it that I need, and then actually do that. Being responsive to pleadings, when we send them, or just responsive to questions when those emails are sent. Those are going to be really great ways to help manage costs. And finally, like, probably the best option, if possible, would be being open to negotiations about settlement, either with the spouse directly or, coming up with settlement options and discuss those with the attorney.
Definitely. That makes total sense. And then in terms of strategy, what should clients know about retainers? Is that money refundable? How is it applied? What is the main takeaway with that billable model that clients should know when it comes to retainers?
Right. Yeah. So when the billable attorney starts working on your case, they ask for a retainer. So typically, I've seen between like $3,000 to $5,000 initially.
Mhm.
But the thing is, once they've earned those fees, they're going to just start sending you bills, and you're going to have to pay more and more and more as those bills come in.
Yeah, so it's almost like deposit, right? Or
Yeah.
a down payment of some kind, where you really don't know what the total amount is going to be. And it's almost like, the sky's the limit. They'll never commit to exactly what that total is.
Right.
So, you just have to know that if it's on a retainer type of basis, that it's a deposit. That's not the total cost. It's just the first step. And then again, the sky's the limit. They'll never tell you what the total cost is from start to finish. And then in terms of wrapping up and just making sure that we, have a few last takeaways based on this topic of fixed fee versus billable or hourly time. If someone's worried about cost but needs to move forward, what is your best advice? What should they do? What's the first step?
Yeah, I mean, our ways, if for example, maybe the spouse that wants to move forward has lower income, you can use marital assets, so money in your bank account to actually pay those fees. You could potentially open up, what I always like to suggest is a credit card with 0% interest for a certain amount of time. And then we can deal with, allocating those fees at the end. And then you can also potentially borrow money from family members or friends. I always, always, always suggest doing a promissory note beforehand to create a debt if you're going to do that. But there are options if necessary. And I know our firm offers like payment plans and financing options, which are really great for clients. So we have those options available as well.
Asking you one final question, Jacqueline, when it comes to this topic of fixed fee versus billable or hourly time, what's one mistake that clients make when they're trying to, let's say, save money, right? They're trying to save money on fees or their divorce case. How would you say they could best avoid that?
Yeah, the best piece of advice is to do your research. Figure out what type of model may work best for you. If like that $2,000 retainer, $3,000 retainer, that's not the end all be all, that you will be paying more. It could eventually end up costing you $15,000, but you thought you were only going to pay a retainer and get it done. So research, speaking or looking up like referrals, that kind of thing, that's going to be really important. Figuring out what kind of model is going to work best for you. Fixed fee attorneys have that incentive to get your case done and are responsive, whereas billable attorneys may not be responsive, but when they do respond, you're paying for it essentially. So number one piece of advice is do your research prior to hiring an attorney.
Great takeaway. And I think everybody that can connect with everybody, right? In terms of finding what best suits you and really trusting your attorney and building that rapport so that they're handling your case in the most efficient and effective way. And ask questions, right? Ask those questions of the person. This is a huge issue or a huge, expense or purchase in your life, and it's affecting you in a great deal. So asking those questions and being confident to ask those questions is, I think, one other takeaway that I would add to what you said, because it matters. Research and who you go with matters. So,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
all right. Thanks, Jacqueline, for joining me today. It was my pleasure. And thanks for talking to me about the differences between fixed fee and billable or hourly time.
Of course. Thanks, Katie, for having me.
Choosing the right billing model can save you thousands of dollars, but that is only part of the equation. What most people miss is how their biggest financial mistakes happen after they hire an attorney, coming when they guess at what their assets are worth. If you want a fair settlement, here's what you need to know next.